Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. There's a photograph that doesn't exist anymore. It was burned in 1891, according to a diary entry found in an attic in Natchez, Mississippi, just 11 years ago. The entry was written by a woman named Caroline Hartwell, and in it she describes destroying a tintype image of a young girl standing beside a white child in a christening gown. Caroline wrote that the girl's eyes were too knowing, too accusing, and that keeping the photograph in the house had made her sick for months. She burned it in the kitchen stove on a January morning and wrote that she finally slept through the night afterward. But Caroline never explained who the girl was. She never wrote her name. What she did write in the margins of that same diary was a single sentence that makes your blood run a few degrees colder when you read it today. Father made sure no one would ask about her again. The girl's name was Ruth. She was 14 years old when she disappeared, and before she vanished, she had given birth to 4 children, all of them fathered by the man who owned her, the man Caroline called father. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is a documented case of systematic erasure, of a life stolen in layers, and of a family who built their legacy on top of a grave they were never required to dig. What happened to Ruth has been treated like a shameful whisper for over a century and a half, but the records are still there, the census notes, the bills of sale, the probate disputes, and they tell a story that no one wanted you to hear. So let me ask you something. How does a human being vanish, not run away, not die with a record, just vanish, as if she never existed at all? That's what happened to Ruth, and the deeper you go into her story, the more you realize that her disappearance wasn't an accident. It was the plan all along. Ruth was born in 1838 on a plantation called Thornfield, just outside Natchez, Mississippi. The plantation was owned by a man named Edmund Hartwell, a cotton broker who had inherited the land from his father and expanded it into one of the most profitable estates in Adams County. Edmund was known in town as a devout churchgoer, a man who quoted scripture at Sunday dinners and donated generously to the local Presbyterian congregation. His wife, Margaret, was described in letters as fragile, often ill, confined to her bedroom for weeks at a time with what doctors called nervous exhaustion. They had 3 children together, but Edmund had 4 others. And all of them were born to Ruth. The first time Ruth's name appears in any record is in an 1,852 plantation ledger listed under household staff. She would have been 14 years old. Next to her name, someone had written in neat cursive, "House Girl, Personal Service." That phrase, personal service, appears again and again in documents from that era, and it meant exactly what you think it means. Ruth wasn't working in the fields. She wasn't in the kitchen. She was kept close. She slept in a small room adjacent to the main house, a room that, according to a sketch found in the County Historical Society, had no lock on the inside of the door, only the outside. By 1853, Ruth had given birth to her first child. A boy. The birth was recorded in Edmund's private ledger, not in any public registry. The child was listed as property. He was valued at $50. There was no father's name given, but plantation records show that Edmund began selling off male slaves from other parts of the estate that same year, keeping only the older men and the children. He was isolating her, making sure there were no questions, no alternative explanations, and Margaret, his wife, knew. We know she knew because in a letter she wrote to her sister in Mobile, Alabama, she mentioned that one of the house girls had become a mother and that it had caused her great distress. She wrote, "I cannot look at the child without feeling a darkness I cannot name. Edmund insists it is God's will, but I do not sleep any more. By 1856, Ruth had given birth 3 more times, 4 children in 4 years. All of them listed in Edmund's ledger, all of them kept on the estate, and Ruth, according to every record we have, never left the property, not once. There are no sale receipts, no transfer documents, no manumission papers. She was there in 1852. She was there in 1858, and then in 1859, after the birth of her fourth child, Ruth's name disappears completely, as if someone took an eraser to history itself. The children remain in the ledger for a few more years, but Ruth is gone. No death certificate, no sale, no mention, just gone when someone disappears from the historical record in the antebellum South. There are usually three explanations. They were sold and the paperwork was lost. They died and no one bothered to record it, or they ran. But none of those explanations fit Ruth's case, and that's what makes this so disturbing. Because the evidence suggests that her disappearance was not an accident, not an oversight, and not an escape. It was an orchestrated erasure. And the people who orchestrated it were the same people who continued to raise her children as slaves on their own property. Let's start with the sale theory. If Ruth had been sold, there would be a record. Slave sales were meticulously documented, especially in Mississippi, where property law was ironclad, and every transaction had to be notarized and filed with the county. Edmund Hartwell kept obsessive records. We have his ledgers going back to 1840. He recorded the sale of a pair of shoes. He recorded the cost of repairing a fence. He noted every bushel of cotton, every horse trade, every borrowed tool, but there is no record of Ruth being sold. Not in Adams County, not in any surrounding county, and slave dealers kept their own records cross-referenced with buyers. Her name does not appear. If she had been sold, someone would have wanted to prove they owned her. But no one ever did. Then there's the possibility that she died. Slave deaths were recorded, especially on estates the size of Thornfield, not out of compassion, but because a death meant a financial loss, and losses had to be accounted for in tax filings and estate valuations. When other slaves on the Hartwell estate died, their deaths were noted. Cause of death, date, estimated value lost. We have records of at least 9 slave deaths at Thornfield between 1050 and 1865, but Ruth is not among them. There is no grave with her name, no entry in the plantation burial log, no mention in any church record or county death index, and here's the thing that should make your skin crawl. Her fourth child, a daughter born in early 1859, was recorded. The birth was noted in Edmund's ledger in March of that year, but by June, Ruth's name is gone from every inventory list, every census preparation note, every scrap of paper that mentioned the people living on that land. 3 months after giving birth, Ruth vanished, and no one in the Hartwell family ever explained why. So that leaves the third possibility, that Ruth ran, that she escaped, and if you want to believe that, I understand. It's the narrative that lets you sleep at night, but runaways left traces, newspaper ads offering rewards, descriptions circulated to neighboring plantations and sheriff's offices, letters between planters warning each other to be on the lookout. Slave catchers kept logs, and Ruth was a young woman with 4 small children on an estate where she was under constant supervision. If she had run, Edmund would have wanted her back. She was an asset. She was the mother of his children. He would have hunted her, but there are no runaway ads, no wanted notices, no nothing. It's as if she simply stopped existing. And her children, all 4 of them, remained on the estate, growing up without her, with no record of who their mother was or what happened to her. Here's where the story takes a turn into something even darker. Because we know what happened to Ruth's children, and their fate tells us everything we need to know about what the Hartwell family was trying to hide. The oldest boy, Ruth's firstborn, was sold in 1862, at the age of 9, to a plantation in Louisiana. The sale was recorded, but his name was not. He was listed only as mulatto boy, property of E. Hartwell. The second child, another boy, died in 1863 from fever. His death was noted in the ledger, but again no name. Just child, age 8, deceased. The third, a girl, was given to Edmund's daughter Caroline as a wedding gift in 1867, 2 years after the war ended, and the fourth child, the girl born in 1859, just before Ruth disappeared, was kept in the main house and raised as a servant. She appears in the 1870 census, living in the Hartwell household, listed as a black domestic worker, age 11. Her name was finally recorded then. They called her Anna. Anna is the only one of Ruth's children whose life we can trace beyond childhood. And what we know about her is heartbreaking. She remained with the Hartwell family her entire life, never married, never left the property. In a photograph taken in 1889, she's standing on the porch of the Hartwell house, decades after emancipation, still working for the same family that had enslaved her mother. She would have been 30 years old in that photograph. And if you look closely at her face, there's something hollow in her eyes, something that makes you wonder what she knew, what she'd been told, whether anyone ever spoke her mother's name in front of her. Town records show that Anna died in 1902 at the age of 43 and was buried in an unmarked grave in the black section of the Natchez City Cemetery. No children, no surviving family, and according to her death certificate, her mother's name was listed as unknown. Unknown. That word should enrage you, because Ruth didn't just vanish from the plantation. She was erased from her own daughter's history. Someone made the decision that Anna would grow up not knowing who her mother was. And that decision was deliberate because here's the thing, Edmund Hartwell died in 1876. In his will, he left the Thornfield estate to his legitimate children, the ones born to his wife Margaret, but he also left a provision. A strange, specific clause that his executors were instructed to follow. He set aside a sum of money, $50 a year, to be paid to the girl Anna, for as long as she remained in service to the family. It was described as a kindness, a gesture of goodwill, but read between the lines, and you see what it really was. Hush money. He was paying her to stay, paying her to remain silent, paying her to never ask questions. And it worked, because there's no record of Anna ever speaking publicly about her mother. No interviews, no letters, no testimony. She lived her entire life in the shadow of the people who had destroyed Ruth, and she died without ever telling the world what she knew. So what happened to Ruth? If she wasn't sold, if she didn't die of natural causes, if she didn't escape, then what? The answer is in the silences. It's in the things that weren't said, the records that weren't kept, the questions that weren't asked. And it's in a single piece of evidence that surfaced in 2009 when a contractor was renovating the old Hartwell estate, which had been converted into a bed and breakfast. He was tearing up the floor in the basement, the part of the house that had once been used for storage, when he found something that stopped him cold, an iron shackle bolted into the foundation. And next to it, scratched into the stone with something sharp, were the letters R and T. The contractor reported it to the local historical society. They sent an archaeologist. What they found beneath that floor was a small, sealed chamber, about 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. It had been filled in with dirt and stones sometime in the mid-19th century, and the entrance had been bricked over. They didn't excavate it. The current owners of the property refused to allow a full dig, citing the cost and the potential impact on the building's structure. But ground-penetrating radar showed something down there, something consistent with human remains. The report was filed with the county, and then it was quietly buried in the archives. No further investigation. No follow-up, and the bed and breakfast is still operating today. You can rent the room that used to be Ruth's. They call it the Garden Suite. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Because here's the truly haunting part. Edmund Hartwell's descendants are still alive. They still live in Mississippi. Some of them still live in Natchez. And they know this story. In 2011, a genealogist contacted several members of the Hartwell family tree, trying to piece together Ruth's fate for a project on enslaved women in the South. Most of them refused to respond. But one did, an elderly woman, a great-great-granddaughter of Edmund's legitimate son. She agreed to a phone interview, and she said something that should chill you to your core. She said, "We were always told that there had been a girl who caused trouble, that my great-great-grandfather had to handle it, that it was a family matter and it stayed in the family." When the genealogist pressed her, asked what "handle it" meant, the woman went quiet. Then she said, "Some things are better left alone. That girl made her choices," and she hung up. Her choices, as if a 14-year-old enslaved girl, raped repeatedly by the man who owned her, had any choices at all. That's the story they tell themselves. That's the lie they've passed down through generations. That Ruth was somehow responsible, that she was the problem, and that her removal, her disappearance, her erasure was justified. Necessary, a family matter. Let's talk about what we know for certain, because the facts alone are damning enough. Ruth was born into slavery in 1838. By the age of 14, she was being sexually assaulted by her owner. By 18, she had given birth to 4 children, all fathered by the same man. She was never allowed to leave the property. She was kept isolated, controlled, and entirely at the mercy of a man who saw her as both property and a sexual object. And then, in 1859, 3 months after giving birth to her 4th child, she disappeared from every record, every census, every piece of documentation, as if she had never existed. Her children were scattered, sold, or kept as servants. And the family that destroyed her went on to live respected, prosperous lives. Edmund Hartwell was buried with full honors in the Natchez City Cemetery. His grave is marked with a large stone monument that describes him as a devoted father, a pillar of the community, and a faithful servant of God. There's no memorial for Ruth, no headstone, no marker, no acknowledgement that she ever lived. But the evidence of what was done to her is everywhere if you know where to look. It's in the census records that list her children as mulatto. It's in the ledger entries that valued them as property. It's in the letters from Margaret Hartwell, who knew what her husband was doing and chose to look away. It's in the will that paid Anna to stay silent, and it's in that shackle, bolted into the basement floor, with her initials scratched into the stone beside it. These are not theories, these are not legends, this is documented history, and the reason you've never heard this story before is because people like the Hartwells spent generations making sure you wouldn't. This is the part that should make you angry. Because Ruth's story is not unique, she was one of thousands, tens of thousands, enslaved women and girls who were raped, impregnated, and discarded by the men who owned them. And when those women became inconvenient, when they knew too much, when their presence threatened the illusion of respectability that white families wanted to maintain, they were disappeared, sold away from their children, locked away, killed, and the records were scrubbed clean. Historians estimate that nearly 60% of enslaved women in the antebellum South were sexually abused by their owners or overseers. 60%. And the children born from that abuse were classified as property, sold alongside livestock, and raised without any knowledge of who their mothers were. This wasn't an anomaly. This was the system, and families like the Hartwells didn't just participate in it. They perfected it. What makes Ruth's case different is that we have just enough evidence to reconstruct what happened, just enough to pull back the curtain and see the machinery of erasure at work. We can see how a human being was methodically removed from existence. And we can see that it wasn't done in secret. It was done in plain sight with the full cooperation of the community, the church, and the legal system. No one stopped it, no one questioned it, and when it was over, everyone agreed to forget. So where does that leave us? What do we do with a story like this? You can't fix it. You can't bring Ruth back. You can't undo what was done to her or give her children the mother they deserved. But what you can do is refuse to let her be erased again. You can say her name, you can acknowledge that she existed, that she suffered, and that what happened to her was a crime. Not just a crime under today's moral standards, but a crime even by the standards of the time. Because even in the 1850s, even in Mississippi, even under slavery, there were people who knew that what Edmund Hartwell was doing was evil. His wife knew, his neighbors knew, the people who worked on that plantation knew. And they all chose silence. That silence is still echoing today. It echoes in the way we teach history, skipping over the stories that make us uncomfortable. It echoes in the way we talk about the past, as if it's something distant and disconnected from the present. And it echoes in the families who still refuse to acknowledge what their ancestors did, because here's the truth that no one wants to say out loud. If your family benefited from slavery, if they owned plantations, if they bought and sold human beings, then your wealth, your status, your land, all of it was built on suffering, and pretending that didn't happen, pretending that people like Ruth don't matter, doesn't make it go away. It just makes you complicit in the cover-up. Ruth's daughter Anna spent her entire life serving the family that had enslaved her mother. She died without children, without a voice, without a legacy, but her story is still here. And so is Ruth's. They're buried in archives, in ledgers, in courthouse records, in the foundations of old houses that have been painted over and turned into tourist attractions. And every time someone tries to tell these stories, there's pushback. People say it's too painful, too divisive, that we should focus on the progress we've made instead of dwelling on the past. But the past isn't dead. It's not even past. It's in the wealth gap between black and white families in America. It's in the generational trauma that still affects descendants of enslaved people. It's in the monuments to Confederate generals and the streets named after slave owners, and it's in the unmarked graves of women like Ruth who were used, discarded, and erased. This is not a comfortable story. It's not meant to be. It's meant to make you angry. It's meant to make you question what you've been told about history, about justice, about who gets remembered and who gets forgotten. And it's meant to make you ask yourself, what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to close this video and forget about Ruth, or are you going to carry her story with you? Are you going to demand that these stories be taught, be acknowledged, be treated with the weight they deserve? Because the only way we stop this from happening again, the only way we break the cycle of erasure and silence, is by refusing to participate in it, by saying the names of the people who were erased, by telling the truth even when it's ugly, especially when it's ugly. Ruth existed, she was real, she was 14 years old when she was first raped by the man who owned her. She gave birth to 4 children before she was 19. And then she was erased, but we know her story now, and that means she's not gone anymore. That means she's here with us, demanding that we remember, demanding that we do better. So tell someone about her. Share this story, write her name in the comments. Make sure that 166 years after she disappeared, Ruth is finally seen. Thank you for watching. If this story affected you, hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden histories. And let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you watching this? Let's make sure Ruth's story reaches every corner of the world.